The Celestial Harmony Station floated silently in the emptiness of space, far from any home world. It was supposed to be neutral territory, a place where humans and the Velcran Empire could meet without starting another war. The station was massive, with hundreds of sectors, thousands of rooms, and corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Most of it was polished and clean during the day, filled with important people in expensive suits having important conversations. But at night, when those people were asleep, the station belonged to people like James Carter. James pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway in Sector 7, listening to the familiar squeak of the wheels against the metal floor. The sound echoed in the empty corridor, bouncing off the walls and disappearing into the darkness ahead. He didn't mind the noise. Actually, he kind of liked it. It reminded him he wasn't completely alone out here, even if his only companion was a beat-up cart full of cleaning supplies. 3 in the morning. His favorite time of day, if you could even call it day in space where there was no sun to mark the hours. At 3 a.m., the diplomats were asleep in their fancy quarters. The politicians weren't wandering around making demands. The Velcran delegates stayed in their wing of the station. It was just James, his cart, and the quiet hum of the life support systems keeping everyone alive in the void. He'd been working this shift for 8 months now. Before that, he'd been a Marine, part of a reconnaissance unit that got sent to all the worst places during the border wars. Those wars were over now, at least officially, but James still saw his squad sometimes when he closed his eyes. Heard their voices. Remembered the last mission that went bad. He didn't like to think about it, which was another reason he loved the night shift. Fewer people meant fewer conversations. Fewer conversations meant fewer questions about his past. James stopped at a maintenance panel and punched in his access code. The panel beeped twice and slid open, revealing a tangle of wires and circuits that controlled the lighting in this section. One of the overhead lights had been flickering for 3 days, driving the day shift workers crazy. He pulled out his diagnostic tool and started checking connections. That's when he heard it. A voice, soft and uncertain, coming from somewhere behind him. "Excuse me?" James turned around, slightly startled. He wasn't used to company out here. Standing about 20 feet down the corridor was a small figure in a maintenance uniform that looked about 3 sizes too big. The sleeves hung past her hands, and the pants bunched up around her boots. A hood covered most of her face, casting it in shadow. She was struggling with an industrial floor buffer, one of the heavy machines they used to keep the floors shiny for the diplomats. The machine wasn't moving, and she seemed to be pushing buttons at random, clearly frustrated. "Need some help there?" James called out, closing the maintenance panel and walking toward her. Yes. This machine. I cannot make it work." Her voice had an accent he couldn't quite place. It was formal, careful, like she was thinking hard about each word before saying it. "I have pressed many buttons, but nothing happens." James smiled. He remembered his first week on the station, trying to figure out all the equipment. "You new here?" "Very new," she said, still fighting with the buffer. "My name is Anne." There was a tiny pause before she said the name, like she'd almost forgotten it. James didn't think too much about it. Lots of people took jobs on the station to get away from something. If she wanted to be Anne, that was fine by him. "I'm James. James Carter. Welcome to the worst shift on the station." He grinned, trying to make her feel better. "But hey, at least it's quiet. Nobody bothers you at 3 a.m. He knelt down next to the floor buffer and immediately saw the problem. "Okay, so first thing, you gotta make sure it's actually plugged in. See this cord here? It needs to go into that outlet." She was struggling with an industrial floor buffer, one of the heavy machines they used to keep the floors shiny for the diplomats. The machine wasn't moving, and she seemed to be pushing buttons at random, clearly frustrated. "Need some help there?" James called out, closing the maintenance panel and walking toward her. Yes. This machine. I cannot make it work." Her voice had an accent he couldn't quite place. It was formal, careful, like she was thinking hard about each word before saying it. "I have pressed many buttons, but nothing happens." James smiled. He remembered his first week on the station, trying to figure out all the equipment. "You new here?" "Very new," she said, still fighting with the buffer. "My name is Anne." There was a tiny pause before she said the name, like she'd almost forgotten it. James didn't think too much about it. Lots of people took jobs on the station to get away from something. If she wanted to be Anne, that was fine by him. "I'm James. James Carter. Welcome to the worst shift on the station." He grinned, trying to make her feel better. "But hey, at least it's quiet. Nobody bothers you at 3 a.m. He knelt down next to the floor buffer and immediately saw the problem. Okay, so first thing, you gotta make sure it's actually plugged in. See this cord here? It needs to go into that outlet. Oh. And sounded embarrassed. That seems very obvious now. Don't worry about it. Everything's confusing the first night. James plugged in the machine and showed her the power switch. Red button turns it on. Green button changes the speed. Yellow button is the emergency stop if it starts getting away from you. These things are heavy, so they can pull you around if you're not careful. He demonstrated, turning on the buffer at low speed. It hummed to life, the circular pad rotating smoothly across the floor. And watched carefully, like she was memorizing every detail. You try, James said, stepping back. And gripped the handles the way he'd shown her, but her movements were awkward and stiff. She pushed the machine forward, but it veered to the left, nearly dragging her into the wall. James reached out and steadied it, guiding her hands to the right position. Relax a little. You're fighting it. Let the machine do the work, you just guide it where it needs to go. They worked together for a few minutes until Anne got the hang of it. Well, sort of. She was still pretty clumsy with it, but at least she wasn't about to crash into anything anymore. Why do humans clean things themselves? Anne asked suddenly. I have seen many species. Most use automated systems. Robots. Why do you push machines by hand? It was an odd question, but James shrugged. Budget cuts, mostly. The station's supposed to have cleaning robots, but half of them broke down and nobody wants to pay to fix them. Cheaper to hire people like us. He started pushing his cart again, and followed with her buffer. Besides, there's something satisfying about it, you know? You can see what you've done. Start of the shift, the floor's dirty. End of the shift, it shines. Not many jobs where you can see your work like that. And seem to consider this carefully. You find satisfaction in simple tasks. Sure. Why not? James stopped at another section of hallway and started emptying trash bins. Not everything has to be complicated to matter. They worked side by side for the next couple of hours, moving through Sector 7 together. James found himself talking more than usual, maybe because Anne asked such strange questions. She wanted to know why humans used paper instead of just digital displays. Why they ate food with utensils instead of with their hands. Why they said excuse me when they bumped into something. You ask a lot of questions, James finally said, not unkindly. I am curious about humans. We do not, she stopped herself. I do not know much about your people. Around 5 in the morning, they took a break in a small maintenance alcove. James sat down on an overturned bucket and pulled out his meal for the night. It wasn't much. A protein bar, the cheap kind that tasted like cardboard mixed with artificial chocolate. And a single packet of instant coffee that he'd been saving. He'd had a rough week financially. The station didn't pay much, and he was sending most of his credits back home to his sister who was raising 3 kids on her own. And stood awkwardly nearby, not sitting down. James noticed she kept glancing at the protein bar. You haven't eaten, have you? He asked. I forgot to bring food. James looked at his protein bar. His only food until the cafeteria opened at 6. His stomach was already growling. Button looked tired, and that uniform was practically swallowing her whole, and something about her reminded him of himself when he'd first gotten out of the military. Lost. Trying to figure things out. He broke the protein bar in half. Actually, he broke it so that her piece was slightly bigger than his. Here. Can't work on an empty stomach. And stared at the protein bar like he just handed her a bar of gold. She didn't move to take it at first. Go on, James said. It's not much, but it'll keep you going. Slowly, carefully, and reached out and took the piece. Her fingers brushed his for just a second, and James noticed they were cold. She held the protein bar in both hands, looking at it, then looking at him. You give me your food? Your only food. It's just a protein bar. James mixed the instant coffee with some water from his bottle and handed half to her in a spare cup. Besides, you look like you need it more than I do. And sat down on the floor, still holding the protein bar like it was precious. She took a small bite, chewing slowly. Then another bite. She was savoring it, making it last. James felt a weird tightness in his chest. When was the last time someone had appreciated something so simple so much? He started talking to fill the silence, telling her about Earth. About real forests with trees that stretched up to the sky. About oceans so big you couldn't see the other side. About his grandmother's apple pie, which he hadn't tasted in 6 years but could still remember perfectly. And listened to every word with an intensity that made James a little self-conscious. She didn't interrupt, didn't check a device, didn't look away. She just listened like his stories were the most important things she'd ever heard. "Why do you work here, James? In the dark? Alone?" The question caught him off guard. James stopped mid-sentence, his coffee halfway to his lips. For a moment, he considered giving her the easy answer. The money was okay. The work was steady. He liked the quiet. All true, but not the real truth. "I used to be a Marine," he said finally. "Lost my whole squad in the border wars. There was this mission, it went bad. Really bad. I was the only one who made it out." He stared at his coffee. "I guess I prefer the quiet now. Fewer people means fewer chances to lose them." And was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "You have known great loss, yet still you share. Why?" James thought about that. "Because somebody once shared with me when I had nothing. After the war, I was in a bad place. Didn't have credits, didn't have a job, didn't have anywhere to go. This old guy at a shelter gave me half his sandwich and told me things would get better. I didn't believe him at the time, but..." He shrugged. "He was right. Figured I'd pass it on. That is." And seemed to be searching for the right word. "That is very human." "Is it?" James laughed a little. "I don't know. I think most people would do the same." "I do not think so," and said quietly. "I think you are different." The shift ended at 6, when the morning crew started to arrive. James cleaned up their break area and got ready to head back to his quarters. And stood up, brushing off her oversized uniform. She bowed slightly, which seemed formal and out of place. "Thank you, James Carter. For the food. For the teaching. For the kindness." She said it 3 times, like she was making sure he understood how much it meant. Then, before James could offer to walk her back to the residential area or even ask which sector she was staying in, and disappeared down a side corridor. She moved quickly, almost like she didn't want to be seen. James stood there for a minute, watching the empty hallway where she'd vanished. There was something strange about Anne. The formal way she talked. Those odd questions. The way she'd lifted that buffer with one hand when she thought he wasn't looking before pretending to struggle. The intense way she listened to everything he said. But everyone on the station was running from something or looking for something. If Anne had secrets, well, that was her business. He'd shared his protein bar and helped her learn to use a floor buffer. That was enough. James headed back to his tiny quarters, fell into his narrow bunk, and closed his eyes. He was asleep in minutes, dreaming about apple pie and a strange woman who didn't know how floor buffers worked. And showed up the next night. And the night after that. And every night for the entire week. No matter which sector James was assigned to clean, she somehow found him. He'd be scrubbing floors in Sector 12, and she'd appear around the corner with her oversized uniform and awkward grip on the cleaning equipment. He'd be fixing air filters in Sector 3, and there she'd be, asking if he needed help reaching the high vents. At first, James thought it was just coincidence. The station was big, sure, but the night shift crew was small. Maybe they just kept getting assigned to the same areas. But by the 3rd night, he realized she was specifically looking for him. She'd pass right by other workers without a word, but the moment she spotted James, her whole posture would change. She'd relax a little, move faster, almost like she was relieved to find him. They fell into a routine that felt comfortable, natural even. James would show her the best way to clean the ventilation grates without getting your fingers pinched. She'd help him move heavy equipment, though he noticed she always pretended it was harder than it actually was for her. During their breaks, usually around 3 a.m. when the station was at its quietest, they'd sit together in whatever maintenance closet or empty corridor they happened to be near. James started saving extra food for her. He couldn't really afford it, but something about the way Anne had looked at that protein bar on the first night stuck with him. On Tuesday, he brought 2 nutrition packs instead of 1. On Wednesday, he smuggled out an extra ration bar from the cafeteria. On Thursday, he split his sandwich 3 ways so they'd each have a piece for break and 1 for later. And never asked for food, but she always accepted what he offered with that same careful reverence, like each bite was something precious. They'd sit in the dim light of emergency floor strips, eating cheap station food, and talk about everything and nothing. James told her about growing up in Nevada, about the desert and the way the heat would shimmer off the highways in summer. And told him about, well, actually, she mostly asked questions. Lots of questions. Why do humans form families, she'd ask. Why not just raise children in groups? Or, why do you have so many words for the same emotion? Happy, joyful, content, pleased, they all seem the same. Or, why do humans touch each other so much? The hand shaking, the shoulder patting, the hugging. James answered as best he could, though sometimes he had to admit he didn't really know. He'd never thought about why people shook hands. It was just what you did. Button seemed fascinated by every small detail of human behavior, studying him like he was some kind of puzzle she was trying to solve. But while Anne was watching him, James was starting to notice things about her. Small things at first. Odd things. On Tuesday night, they were working in a corridor near the diplomatic wing. James needed to replace a burnt-out panel in the ceiling, which meant climbing a ladder while Anne held it steady below. He was focused on disconnecting the wiring when he noticed something on his diagnostic pad. The security camera that should have been recording this hallway had gone offline. Not broken exactly, just off. Heh, that's weird, James muttered. What is weird? Anne asked from below. Camera's out. That's the third one today. He climbed down the ladder and checked his pad again. Actually, looking at the logs, every camera in the sections where we've been working tonight has malfunctioned. What are the odds of that? Anne was quiet for a moment. Perhaps they are old cameras. Things break. Yeah, maybe. But James had been on the station long enough to know that the security systems were maintained obsessively. Cameras didn't just randomly fail, especially not in patterns. Wednesday night brought something even stranger. James and Anne were taking their break in a small observation lounge that nobody used during night shift. Through the windows, you could see other parts of the station and the darkness of space beyond. James was halfway through telling a story about his sister's kids when Anne suddenly stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the Velcrin diplomatic wing. 3 of them will leave tomorrow, she said quietly. What? Who? Anne blinked, like she was coming out of a trance. Nothing. I was just thinking out loud. But the next morning, James heard the gossip from the day shift supervisor. 3 high-ranking Velcrin delegates had filed emergency transfer requests overnight and were leaving on the next transport. They'd given no explanation, just demanded immediate reassignment. It had the diplomatic corps in an uproar. James thought about Anne's words. 3 of them will leave tomorrow. Not I wonder if anyone will leave or I hope those delegates leave. She'd said it like it was already decided. Like she knew. Thursday night, James decided to test something. They were working in a maintenance bay, a huge room full of spare parts and broken equipment waiting to be repaired. In the corner sat a damaged generator panel, a massive piece of machinery that had been sitting there for weeks because it took a 3-person crew with lifting equipment to move it. James walked over to it, pretending to check the damage. Man, we really need to get this thing out of here. It's taking up half the bay. Why do they not move it? Anne asked, coming to stand beside him. Too heavy. You need 3 people and an antigrave dolly just to lift one corner. James knocked on the metal casing. Thing probably weighs 300 pounds, easy. That is very heavy, Anne agreed. James stepped back, pulling out his pad to check something. But he was watching Anne in his peripheral vision, using an old trick from his Marine days. People act different when they think nobody's looking. Anne glanced at James, so he was focused on his pad, and reached down to shift the generator panel out of her way. She grabbed it with one hand and lifted it like it was made of cardboard, moving it 3 feet to the left without any visible effort. Then she froze, realizing what she'd done, and slowly looked over at James. He was staring right at her, pad forgotten in his hand. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Anne quickly grabbed the panel with both hands and made a big show of struggling with it, grunting with effort as she tried to make it look heavy. She let it drop with a loud clang. Very, very heavy, she said, slightly out of breath. But James had seen her lift it. Had seen how easy it was for her. They worked in silence for the next hour. James didn't bring it up, but his mind was racing. The malfunctioning cameras. The delegates leaving. The impossible strength. Anne's constant questions about humans, like she was studying them. The way she spoke, formal and careful, like English wasn't her first language. The way she always kept her hood up, even though it was just the 2 of them. Finally, around 4 in the morning, James couldn't take it anymore. And, who are you really? He asked. They were alone in a corridor, no one else around for at least 3 sectors. Anne stopped cleaning and stood very still. I am Anne. A cleaner. Like you. Cleaners don't lift 300-pound panels with one hand. James set down his equipment and faced her directly. They don't know when delegates are going to leave before it happens. Security cameras don't just happen to malfunction everywhere they go. And was quiet for a long time. James could see her hands gripping the handle of her cleaning cart, knuckles tight. I cannot tell you who I am, she finally said. Can't or won't? Both. Neither. She looked up at him, and even in the shadow of her hood, he could see her eyes. There was fear there, but also something else. Sadness maybe. If I tell you, I put you in danger. If I tell you, everything changes. Everything's already changed, James said. I know you're not who you say you are. I know you're. I don't know what you are. But I know you're hiding something. Yes, and whispered. I am hiding. But not from you, James Carter. Never from you. Then from who? And turned away, looking down the empty corridor like she expected someone to appear. From everyone. From my people. From your people. From what I am supposed to be. She looked back at him. You said you worked the night shift because you lost people. Because being alone is safer. I understand that more than you know. James felt his anger fading. He'd been ready to confront her, maybe even report her to security. But the pain in her voice was real. The fear was real. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't small. Are you going to hurt anyone? He asked. Are you here to sabotage the station or spy or? I don't know, whatever it is people do when they sneak onto stations under fake names. No, and said immediately. I would never hurt anyone here. Especially not you. You have to believe that. And the strange thing was, James did believe her. Maybe he was being stupid. Maybe he was letting his guard down because she'd become something like a friend over the past week. But his gut told him and wasn't dangerous. At least, not to him. Okay, he said finally. You don't have to tell me who you are. But you have to tell me one thing. Are you in trouble? Real trouble? And laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I am in more trouble than you can imagine. I am? She stopped herself. I am observing. Learning about humans. About whether you are what my people believe you are. And what do your people believe we are? Dangerous. Savage. Incapable of mercy or kindness. Anne's voice was barely a whisper. But then I met you. A human who shares his last meal with strangers. Who teaches with patience instead of anger. Who works in the dark because he is afraid to lose people again, yet still treats everyone with dignity. She looked at him. You are not what they said you would be, James Carter. You are not what I expected at all. Before James could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Red emergency lights began flashing in the corridors. Anne's head snapped up, her whole body going tense like a soldier hearing gunfire. James grabbed his comm unit. The message coming through made his blood run cold. All personnel, lockdown protocol initiated. Environmental system failure in conference room 9. Repeat, environmental failure. Multiple casualties possible. Conference room 9 was the main diplomatic chamber. If there were casualties there during the peace negotiations? James didn't finish the thought. He just grabbed his emergency repair kit and ran. Behind him, he heard and following, her footsteps impossibly light and fast for someone her size. Whatever secret she was hiding would have to wait. Right now, people needed help. James woke up to the sound of sirens screaming through the station's corridors. Not the normal alarms that went off during drills. These were different. Louder. More urgent. The kind of sound that meant something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. He rolled out of his narrow bunk, his military training kicking in before his brain fully caught up. His quarters were small, just a bed, a locker, and a tiny bathroom, but right now they felt even smaller with the red emergency lights flashing through the darkness. He pulled on his maintenance uniform and opened his door, stepping into chaos. People were running everywhere. Station security in their black uniforms. Diplomatic aides in their fancy clothes, looking terrified and confused. He grabbed a passing security officer by the arm. What's happening? The officer shook him off. Lockdown. Get back in your quarters and stay there. But James had spent too many years in the military to just hide in his room when something was wrong. He made his way toward the main corridor, staying close to the walls, trying to piece together what was going on from the fragments of conversation he overheard. Can't find her anywhere. Searched every sector twice. This means war, you know it does. And then he heard it. The announcement that made his blood turn to ice. All personnel, lockdown protocol initiated. The Velcrin Empress is missing. Repeat, Empress Victoria is missing. All sectors are sealed. No one enters or leaves the station until she is found. James stopped walking. The Empress. The actual Velcrin Empress was supposed to be on the station. He'd known that, vaguely, the way you know about important things happening to important people that don't really affect you. She was here for the peace negotiations, the final talks that would either end the decades of tension between humans and the Velcrin or start another war. And now she was missing. James leaned against the wall, his mind racing. Without the Empress, the treaty would collapse. The hardliners on both sides, the ones who wanted war, would use this as proof that peace was impossible. They'd say she was assassinated, or kidnapped, or that she'd never intended to negotiate in good faith. Within days, maybe hours, the fleets would start moving. And once they started, there'd be no stopping them. He thought about his squad, blown apart in a border war skirmish that hadn't even had a name. Just another firefight in another nameless sector. He thought about all the people who'd died in those wars, and all the people who'd die in the next one. The station became a nightmare over the next few hours. Security teams from both sides were tearing the place apart, searching every room, every corridor, every ventilation shaft. James watched them work with a sick feeling in his stomach. They weren't just searching. They were angry. Scared. The human teams thought the Velcrin had done something to their own Empress to frame humanity. The Velcrin teams thought humans had captured or killed her to sabotage the peace talks. Trust was evaporating by the minute. James was questioned twice. The first time was by human military intelligence, two stone-faced officers who took him to a small interrogation room and grilled him for an hour. Where had he been for the last week? Had he seen anything unusual? Had he noticed anyone acting suspiciously? Anyone who didn't belong? He answered their questions mechanically, his mind elsewhere. No, he hadn't seen anything unusual. Just cleaning floors and fixing ventilation systems like he did every night. No, he hadn't noticed anyone suspicious. But he was lying. He had seen someone unusual. Someone who definitely didn't belong. And her odd, formal way of speaking. Her impossible strength. Her questions about humanity, like she was studying them from the outside. The way security cameras just happened to malfunction wherever she went. The way she'd known those Velcrin delegates would leave before they'd even filed their transfer requests. Mr. Carter? Are you listening? James snapped back to attention. The intelligence officer was staring at him, suspicious now. Yes, sorry. Just tired. Night shift. They let him go eventually, but made it clear he wasn't to leave his assigned sectors. As if he could leave anyway with the station locked down tighter than a military prison. The second questioning was worse. Much worse. Two Velcrin security officers cornered him in a maintenance bay. They were tall, imposing, with scales that seemed to shift colors in the light and eyes that looked right through him. James had fought Velcrin soldiers during the war. He knew how dangerous they could be. These two weren't soldiers, but they were just as frightening. You work night shift, one of them said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You have access to restricted areas. Ventilation systems. Service corridors. For maintenance, yeah. That's my job. The second officer stepped closer, invading his space in a way that made James's hands clench into fists. You could move through this station without being seen. You could hide someone. You could hide our Empress. I don't know anything about your Empress, James said, trying to keep his voice steady. I clean floors. I fix air filters. That's it. They didn't believe him. He could see it in their eyes. But they didn't have any proof, so eventually they left, warning him that if he was hiding anything, they would find out. And when they did, the consequences would be severe. James spent the rest of the day in his quarters, supposedly resting but actually staring at the ceiling, thinking. About Anne. About the missing Empress. About the coincidence of it all. Except it wasn't a coincidence, was it? And had appeared on the station right around the time the Empress was supposed to arrive. She was hiding something, something big. She'd as much as admitted it when he confronted her. And she'd said her people believed humans were savage and dangerous. Her people. Not humanity. Which meant? No. It was impossible. The Velcrin Empress wouldn't disguise herself as a lowly maintenance worker. She wouldn't spend her nights scrubbing floors and eating protein bars with a janitor. It was absurd. But the more James thought about it, the more it made a terrible kind of sense. Night came eventually, though it was hard to tell with the emergency lighting still active throughout the station. James lay in his bunk, staring at the door, wondering if Anne would appear tonight. Wondering if he wanted her to. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, his door was opening. Silently, without the usual hiss and click of the automatic lock. Just opening, as if it had never been locked at all. James sat up, his heart hammering, and stood in the doorway. But she wasn't Anne. Not anymore. She stood differently now. Taller, straighter, with none of the awkward uncertainty she'd shown before. She wasn't hunched over or trying to make herself smaller. And her hood was pushed back. In the dim light, James could see her face clearly for the first time. The scales that covered her skin weren't just random patterns, they formed intricate designs that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Bioluminescent markings. He'd seen them before, in diplomatic briefings and news footage. Every Velcrin had scale patterns, but only royalty had the glowing ones. Only the royal family had markings like that. "Hello, James," she said quietly. Her voice was the same, but the formality made sense now. She wasn't struggling with English. She was speaking the way royalty spoke, careful and precise. "My true name is Victoria. I am Empress of the Velcrin Collective." James couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. His mind was trying to process what he was seeing, what she was saying, but it felt like trying to run through deep water. Everything was slow and wrong and impossible. "You." He couldn't even form the words. "You're." "Yes." Victoria stepped into his quarters, and the door slid shut behind her, sealing them in together. "I know this is difficult to understand. I know you must have many questions." "Questions?" James found his voice, and it came out louder than he intended. "You're the Empress. The actual Empress. And you've been pretending to be a maintenance worker? You've been eating my protein bars and asking me about human customs and—" He stopped, another thought hitting him. "The whole station is looking for you. Everyone thinks you've been kidnapped or killed. They're about to start a war because of you." "I know." Victoria's face showed pain, real and deep. "I know, and I am so sorry, James. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant for any of this." "Then why?" James stood up, facing her across the tiny room. "Why did you do it? Why the disguise? Why the lies?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her glowing markings pulsing slowly in the darkness. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I needed to see the truth." "What truth?" "The truth about humanity." She moved to the small window in his quarters, looking out at the stars beyond. "My advisors, my generals, my entire government, they all told me the same thing. Humans are savages. Warmongers. Incapable of mercy or compassion or anything beyond violence. They said negotiating with you was pointless because humans only understand strength and domination." James felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. "And you believed them?" "I didn't know what to believe," Victoria said. "I have spent my entire life hearing about the threat of humanity. About your wars, your aggression, your brutality. And there is truth in it, James. Humanity has done terrible things. Just as my people have done terrible things." She turned to face him. "But I am Empress. My decision will determine the fate of billions. I could not make that decision based on propaganda and fear. I needed to see for myself." "So you came here in disguise?" "Yes. I told no one except my most trusted aide, who is now probably being executed by my own government for conspiracy." Her voice cracked slightly. "I came to this station and took the lowest position I could imagine. A cleaner. Invisible. Unwatched. I wanted to see humanity at its worst, when you thought no one important was looking. I wanted to see what humans do when there are no consequences, no witnesses, no reason to pretend." James understood now. Understood everything. "And instead you found me." "Yes." Victoria's eyes met his, and there was something in them that looked like wonder. "I found a man with nothing who gave everything. A warrior who chose peace over violence. A human who treated the lowest servant with dignity and kindness, not because someone was watching, but because that is who you are." She took a step closer. "Do you understand what you did, James Carter? You shared your last food with an empress. You taught royalty how to use a floor buffer. You risked your life to save my people in that conference room, and you didn't even know one of them was me." James remembered that night. The diplomats trapped behind sealed doors, running out of oxygen. He'd crawled through the maintenance shaft, his hands bleeding from torn metal edges, working frantically to override the lockout. He hadn't thought about whether they were human or Velcrin. He just thought about saving them. Anyone would have done the same, he said. No, Victoria said firmly. They would not. That is what I have learned. That is what you taught me. Most people would have helped only their own kind. Or demanded payment. Or used the situation for political advantage. But you just helped. Because people needed help. James sat down on his bunk, his legs suddenly weak. Why are you here? Why tell me this now? Victoria's expression turned grim. Because I am trapped. And I need your help. Trapped? You're the Empress. Just reveal yourself. Call off the search. Tell everyone you're safe. I cannot. She sat down next to him, careful to leave space between them. While I was here, in disguise, my own government was betrayed. Hardliners in my court staged a coup. They believe I was assassinated by humans. They are using my death to justify the invasion they have always wanted. But you're not dead. You can prove it. Can I? Victoria laughed bitterly. If I reveal myself now, both sides will assume I was captured and tortured by humans. The conspiracy theories are already spreading. Some say you kidnapped me. Others say I never intended to negotiate in good faith. If I appear now, it will not stop the war. It will only give both sides proof that the other cannot be trusted. James felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. So what do you do? What can you do? I must return to my people. I must stop the coup and reveal the truth. But I cannot do it from here, surrounded by humans. She looked at him, and James saw fear in her eyes for the first time. Real, genuine fear. I am asking you, a janitor who shared crackers with a stranger, to help me escape. To help me get off this station and back to my fleet before the invasion begins. That's impossible. The station's locked down. No ships in or out. I know. Security is everywhere. Both human and Velcrin. I know. If I help you, I'll be labeled a traitor. I could be executed. I know. Victoria's voice was barely audible. You owe me nothing, James Carter. In fact, turning me in would probably make you a hero. Save yourself. Tell them where I am. Claim the reward. I would not blame you. James stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see patrol ships circling the station, weapons armed, ready for war. He thought about his squad again. About Jenny, who used to tell terrible jokes during long stakeouts. About Cooper, who kept pictures of his kids in his helmet. About Rodriguez, who died saving James's life in their last mission. He thought about how many more people would die if this war started. How many more families would be destroyed. How many more soldiers would come home in boxes, or not come home at all. Then he thought about Victoria, carefully eating half a protein bar like it was the most precious thing in the world. About the way she'd listened to his stories about Earth with such focus and interest. About how she'd risked exposing herself to save him when that security officer fired. James turned around. I know every vent, every shaft, every hidden passage in this station. Every maintenance corridor, every service tunnel, every forgotten storage bay. Victoria stood up slowly, hope dawning on her face. I can get you off this station, James said. But you have to trust me completely. And I need you to promise me something. Anything. When you get back to your people, when you stop this war, you remember this. You remember that a human helped you when he had every reason not to. That a janitor chose peace over revenge. He stepped closer to her. You remember that kindness matters, Victoria. Even in the dark. Especially in the dark. Tears were forming in Victoria's glowing eyes. I will never forget, James Carter. I swear it on everything I am. I will never forget. James grabbed his maintenance kit, checked his access codes, and pulled up a map of the station on his handheld device. Okay then, Your Majesty. Time to go home. Victoria smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since revealing herself. Please. Call me Anne. They opened the door and stepped into the chaos together, a janitor and an empress, about to attempt the impossible. The first night was the hardest. James had mapped out a route through the maintenance sections that would keep them away from the main corridors and security checkpoints, but he hadn't counted on just how thorough the search would be. Every few hundred feet, they'd hear voices or footsteps and have to freeze, pressing themselves into shadows or ducking into storage closets barely big enough for one person, let alone two. James led Victoria through a ventilation shaft in Sector 9, crawling on his hands and knees with his small maintenance light clipped to his collar. The shaft was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide and 2 feet tall. Victoria followed behind him, her breathing echoing in the metal tunnel. How much further? She whispered. Another 100 feet, then we drop down to the lower maintenance level. Nobody patrols down there. James paused at an intersection, listening. Voices drifted up from somewhere below. Human voices, speaking quickly. He gestured for Victoria to stay still. They waited in the darkness for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. James's knees ached from kneeling on the hard metal. His shoulders burned from holding himself in an awkward crouch. But he didn't move. Couldn't move. One sound, one glimpse of Victoria's glowing markings in the wrong place, and it would all be over. Finally, the voices faded. James started crawling again. They emerged in a maintenance bay that smelled like oil and hot metal. James checked his handheld scanner, making sure no one was nearby, then helped Victoria out of the shaft. She stood up, trying to stretch muscles cramped from crawling, and James saw her wince. You okay? I am fine. Just not accustomed to crawling through ventilation systems. She attempted a smile. That was not part of my royal training. James allowed himself a small grin. Stick with me. I'll teach you all kinds of things they don't cover in royal training. They moved through the bay quickly, James leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd worked these spaces for months. He knew which floor panels creaked. Which doors had faulty sensors that would trigger alarms. Which corridors had camera coverage and which ones had been temporarily offline, for so long that maintenance had basically forgotten about them. The second day, things got more complicated. Security had expanded their search pattern, and James realized with growing dread that they were checking the maintenance tunnels now. His safe routes were becoming dangerous. He led Victoria through the waste processing tunnels in Sector 4, and the smell hit them like a physical wall. Victoria actually gagged, covering her nose with her sleeve. I'm sorry, James said quietly. But the search teams won't come down here. Nobody comes down here unless they absolutely have to. I understand why, Victoria managed, her voice muffled by her sleeve. They waded through water that James tried very hard not to think about too much, their boots splashing softly in the darkness. Pipes dripped overhead. Something skittered away in the shadows. Victoria stayed close behind him, trusting him completely even though he was leading her through literal sewage. Your people must think very little of me, she said after a while, if they believe I would allow myself to be captured so easily. I think they're scared, James replied. Fear makes people stupid. Makes them believe things that don't make sense because believing them is easier than facing the truth. And what is the truth? James stopped at a junction, checking his map. The truth is that most people, human or Velcrin, just want to live their lives without being blown up. But there's always some group of powerful idiots who profit from war, who gain from conflict. And they're really good at making everyone else scared enough to fight for them. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You are wiser than many of my advisors, James Carter. I've just seen more wars than I wanted to. He pointed down a side tunnel. This way. We're heading for the old storage sections. They were sealed off years ago after some kind of structural issue. Nobody goes there anymore. The old storage sections were like a ghost town. Rows of empty shelves covered in dust. Crates marked with shipping labels from decades ago. Emergency lights that flickered uncertainly, barely providing enough illumination to see. James found a small office in the back, checked that it was secure, and they finally stopped to rest. James pulled out the food he'd managed to smuggle from his quarters before they left. A couple of protein bars, some water pouches, a package of crackers that was probably expired but still edible. He split everything evenly and handed Victoria her share. She took it with that same careful reverence she'd shown that first night. You continue to share with me. Even now, when you are risking everything. Old habits. James ate his protein bar in 3 bites, too hungry to savor it. Besides, you need your strength. We've got a long way to go. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Finally, Victoria spoke. James, I want to tell you something. About my people. About why this matters so much. You don't have to. I do. You deserve to know why I came here. Why I put you in this danger. She stared at the water pouch in her hands. The Velcrin were nearly extinct once. About 300 years ago. We were dying. Our home world had been ravaged by disease, our population was collapsing, and we had no hope of recovery. James listened, drawn in by the pain in her voice. Another species found us. The Kerith. They were explorers, scientists. They could have taken our world, our resources. We were too weak to stop them. Instead, they helped us. shared their medical technology, their agricultural knowledge. They stayed for 10 years, teaching us, helping us rebuild. They asked for nothing in return. They just cared. That's incredible, James said quietly. Yes. We survived because someone chose kindness over conquest. Because someone showed us mercy when we were at our weakest. Victoria's glowing markings pulsed slowly, sadly. The Kerith are gone now. Their civilization fell to a plague we could not help them with, despite trying. And over the generations, my people forgot. Forgot what it means to receive kindness. Forgot what it means to be weak and desperate. You're hardliners, James said, understanding. Yes. They preach strength through domination. They say mercy is weakness, that helping others makes you vulnerable. They want us to become conquerors, to take what we need rather than negotiate for it. She looked at James. They wanted me to see humans as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. As savages to be defeated. But then you met me. Then I met a human janitor who shared his last protein bar with a stranger. Who fixed life support systems to save people he'd never met. Who taught me with patience instead of anger. Who risked everything to help someone in need, even though helping her could destroy his life. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. You proved them wrong, James. You showed me that the spirit of the Kerith still exists in this galaxy. That mercy is not weakness. That kindness is the greatest strength. James didn't know what to say. He'd never thought of himself as particularly kind or strong. He just did what seemed right. On the third day, they had their first real close call. James was leading Victoria through a maintenance corridor in Sector 15 when they heard voices ahead. Multiple voices. A patrol. James grabbed Victoria and pulled her into a side passage, but it was a dead end. The patrol was coming their way, and there was nowhere to hide. He could see flashlight beams bouncing off the walls, getting closer. Without thinking, James spotted a service panel in the wall. It led to a crawlspace used for accessing the electrical systems. He ripped it open and practically shoved Victoria inside. Don't make a sound, he whispered. No matter what happens. He barely had time to close the panel before the patrol rounded the corner. 3 security officers, all human, all looking tired and frustrated. One of them spotted James and immediately raised his weapon. You. Freeze. James raised his hands slowly, his heart hammering. Easy. I'm maintenance. Just checking the power relays. Nobody's supposed to be in this sector. It's restricted during lockdown. The officer stepped closer, suspicious. Show me your ID. James reached for his badge slowly, trying to stay calm. The officer examined it, then looked at James's face, comparing it to the photo. Behind him, James could hear the other 2 officers spreading out, searching the corridor. What are you really doing down here? The officer asked. Like I said, power relays. We've been having fluctuations in sectors 14 through 16. Someone has to fix them, lockdown or not. Unless you want the lights to go out. James tried to sound annoyed, like this was just another inconvenience in a long series of inconveniences. The officer studied him for what felt like an eternity. Behind the service panel, Victoria was completely silent. James forced himself not to look at it, not to give away her position. Finally, the officer handed back his ID. Make it quick and get out of here. And report your location to security next time. We're jumpy enough without maintenance guys sneaking around. Will do, James said, his voice somehow steady despite his racing heart. The patrol moved on, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. James waited until he couldn't hear them anymore, then waited another 5 minutes just to be sure. Finally, he opened the service panel. Victoria emerged, her eyes wide. That was too close. Yeah. James's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with him. We need to move faster. They're expanding the search grid. Soon there won't be anywhere left to hide. They continued on, moving through corridors that hadn't seen maintenance workers in years. James's legs ached. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. But he kept going because stopping meant capture, and capture meant war. During a brief rest in an abandoned cargo bay, Victoria watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? James asked. You saved me again. You could have run, could have claimed you were just doing your job and let them find me. But you hid me. Protected me. Yeah, well. James rubbed his face, exhausted. I don't do things halfway. You asked for my help, and I said yes. That means I see it through. Even if it costs you everything. James thought about his squad again. About Rodriguez, who'd thrown himself on a grenade to save the rest of them. About what sacrifice really meant. Some things are worth the cost, he said simply. Victoria moved closer and did something completely unexpected. She reached out and touched his hand, a gesture that he'd learned was deeply significant in Velcrin culture. Reserved for family and the closest of friends. When this is over, she said quietly, when I am Empress again and you are just a janitor again, I will remember this. I will remember that a human chose peace when he could have chosen revenge. That you helped me not for reward or recognition, but because it was right. Just get back to your people, James said. Stop this war. That's all the reward I need. They rested for another hour, then continued their impossible journey through the darkness, a janitor and an empress, running out of time and safe places to hide. But they were still moving. Still fighting. Still choosing hope over fear. And sometimes, James thought, that was enough. James woke up to the worst headache of his life and the distinct feeling that something had gone very, very wrong. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, burning pain that made him gasp when he tried to move. The last thing he remembered was Victoria's hands glowing with that strange light as she pressed them against his wound. Then everything had gone dark. Now he opened his eyes to find himself in what looked like a cargo bay, lying on the cold metal floor. And he wasn't alone. Human soldiers stood in a semicircle to his left, at least a dozen of them, all armed with rifles pointed in his direction. To his right, Velcrin warriors in their ceremonial armor formed another semicircle, their weapons similarly trained on him. The two groups weren't pointing guns at each other, which would have been bad enough. They were both pointing at James. And at Victoria, who stood directly over him in a protective stance, her hood finally thrown back completely, her royal markings blazing with light bright enough to illuminate the entire bay. James tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his shoulder. Victoria glanced down at him, relief flashing across her face, but she didn't move from her position between him and the weapons. Stay down, she said quietly. You are still healing. What? James's voice came out as a croak. What happened? That security officer's helmet camera, Victoria said, her eyes never leaving the soldiers surrounding them. The footage was transmitted to both security networks. They know I am alive. They know you were helping me. And they know I used royal healing techniques to save your life. James's fuzzy brain tried to process this. Royal healing techniques. That meant everyone knew who she was now. There was no more hiding. A human officer stepped forward, an older woman with a general's insignia on her uniform and an expression like she'd just swallowed something poisonous. Mr. Carter, step away from the Velcrin. Slowly. We have medical personnel standing by. He stays where he is, Victoria said, her voice carrying an authority that made even the general hesitate. James Carter is under my personal protection. A Velcrin commander on the other side, bigger than the others and covered in battle scars, made a sound that might have been a laugh or a growl. Your Majesty, please. This human has clearly captured you. Use some kind of human trickery. Step away from him so we can execute him for his crimes against the Empire. Execute him? Victoria's voice rose, and James felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. The only crime here is your stupidity, Commander Thax. The Velcrin commander's scales rippled with what James had learned was anger. Your Majesty, we understand you may be confused. Perhaps suffering from some kind of human mind control. I am not confused. Victoria's shout echoed through the cargo bay. And the only ones who seem to be under someone else's control are my own military, who staged a coup while I was investigating whether peace with humanity was possible. That caused a stir. The Velcrin warriors shifted uncomfortably. The human soldiers glanced at each other, uncertain. The human general spoke up again. With all due respect, Empress, we have no way of verifying your claims. For all we know, this is some kind of Velcrin plot. You could be a spy, or a saboteur, or... Then let me speak, Victoria interrupted. Her voice was calmer now, but no less powerful. Broadcast this conversation to both our peoples. To Earth. To the Velcrin homeworld. To every ship, every station, every colony. Let them hear the truth from my own mouth, and let them decide. The general and the Velcrin commander exchanged looks. Neither seemed to like the idea, but both knew they couldn't refuse. Not with their own empress making the demand in front of witnesses. Fine, the general said finally. But if this is some kind of trick. If this is a trick, Victoria said coldly, you may shoot me yourself. But first, you will listen. Someone brought forward a camera drone. James watched it float into position, its red recording light blinking on. He could see smaller screens being set up around the cargo bay, probably showing the broadcast going out across the galaxy. His face was going to be on every news channel. His mother was going to have a heart attack. Victoria took a breath, and when she spoke, it was with the full weight of her position. Not in the cleaning lady. Not the curious stranger asking questions about humanity. This was Empress Victoria, ruler of the Velcrin Collective, addressing her people and their former enemies. "I am Empress Victoria of the Velcrin," she began. 3 weeks ago, I came to the Celestial Harmony Station in secret. Not as a prisoner. Not as a spy. But in disguise, as a maintenance worker, to observe humanity without being observed myself. The murmurs started immediately, but Victoria ignored them. My advisors told me that humans were savages. Warmongers incapable of mercy or compassion. They said negotiating peace was pointless, that humanity only understood violence and domination. I needed to know if they were right. So I took the lowest position I could find on this station. A cleaning job. Working the night shift where no one important would see me. I wanted to witness humanity at its worst, when there were no cameras, no witnesses, no reason to pretend to be better than you are. James felt every eye in the room turn to him for a moment before returning to Victoria. Instead, Victoria continued, I met James Carter. A human janitor. A former soldier who had lost his entire squad in our wars. A man who had every reason to hate my people. Every reason to be bitter, angry, violent. She paused, and James could see emotion threatening to break through her royal composure. This man shared his last meal with me. The only food he had, he split in half and gave me the larger portion. When I struggled to learn my job, he taught me with patience and kindness. When life support failed and diplomats, including my own people, were trapped and dying, he risked his life to save them. He asked for nothing in return. Expected nothing. He simply helped because people needed help. Victoria turned slightly, looking down at James. And when he discovered who I really was, when he learned that I was the enemy empress his people feared and hated, he did not betray me. He did not turn me in for reward or recognition. Instead, when I told him I was trapped and needed help, he said yes. He led me through this station for 3 days, staying one step ahead of both our military forces. He went without food so I could eat. He went without sleep so I could rest. And when a frightened security officer shot him, thinking he was a traitor, I used forbidden royal healing techniques to save his life. Because I owe him a debt that can never truly be repaid. The cargo bay was completely silent now. James could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. My own government staged a coup while I was here, Victoria said, her voice hardening. Hardliners who wanted war, who saw my peace mission as weakness. They spread lies that I was assassinated by humans, using my supposed death to justify the invasion they have always desired. She transmitted something from a device on her wrist. On the screens around the bay, James could see Velcrin officials in ornate armor, clearly surprised and terrified. I am transmitting my royal authentication codes now, Victoria said. Any Velcrin watching this broadcast can verify that I am who I claim to be. And I am using my authority as Empress to charge the members of the coup with high treason. Commander Rylith, General Vex, Chancellor Moran, you are all stripped of rank and position. Surrender yourselves immediately. On the screens, James watched as Velcrin guards surrounded the coup leaders. One tried to run and was tackled by his own soldiers. It was over in seconds. Victoria turned back to the camera, addressing both species now. I came here believing I would find monsters. Instead, I found James Carter, who proved everything I believed was wrong. If humanity can produce even one person like him, one person who chooses kindness over cruelty, mercy over revenge, peace over war, then we have misjudged you entirely. The human general stepped forward, her expression uncertain. Empress, even if everything you say is true, how can we trust that this isn't just words? How do we know you won't change your mind once you're back with your people? Victoria smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. You want proof of my commitment to peace? Fine. She transmitted another code. On the screens, James saw Velcrin military ships that had been in attack formation suddenly powering down their weapons. Hundreds of ships, all standing down simultaneously. I just gave the order to withdraw our military from all human border territories, Victoria said. I am offering not just peace, but alliance. Joint defense pacts. Trade agreements. Cultural exchanges. Everything. That's. The general seemed to be struggling for words. That's an incredible offer. It is the right offer, Victoria corrected. Because I have seen the truth that fear and propaganda blinded us to. That there is more strength in an open hand than a closed fist. That sharing your last meal with a stranger is not weakness, it is the foundation of civilization itself. She looked directly into the camera. My people, listen to me. We survived 300 years ago because the Kereth showed us mercy when we were weak. They could have conquered us. Instead, they helped us. And we forgot that lesson. We became the very thing we should have feared, a species that sees kindness as vulnerability. Her glowing markings pulsed brighter. No more. Today, we remember who we were meant to be. Today, we honor the memory of those who saved us by choosing to save others. Today, we make peace not because we are weak, but because we are finally strong enough to choose it. Victoria turned to the human general. I offer you the same choice I gave James Carter. You can see me as an enemy to be destroyed. Or you can see me as someone who needs help building something better than war. What will you choose? The general stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she lowered her weapon. Around the bay, other human soldiers did the same. The Velcrin warriors watched their empress, then followed suit. The treaty will be signed within the hour, the general said quietly. I'll make sure of it. Victoria nodded, then immediately dropped to her knees beside James. The imperial bearing fell away, and she was just and again, worried about her friend. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I got shot, James managed. But alive. Thanks to you. No. Thanks to you. She helped him sit up, supporting his weight. You taught me that mercy is not weakness. You showed me what my people could become if we remembered how to be kind. Around them, diplomats were rushing in, already arguing about treaty terms and protocols. News drones were swarming. Someone was trying to get James to sign something. Another person wanted to give him a medal. Everyone was talking at once. James ignored all of it. He looked at Victoria. What happens now? Now, you will be offered many things. Promotions, honors, positions of power. People will want to make you a symbol, a hero. Victoria smiled. What will you do? James thought about it for maybe half a second. I'm going back to my janitorial job. Victoria laughed, actually laughed. I thought you might say that. And you? Back to being Empress full-time? Yes. But. She hesitated. There is a tradition in my culture. Once a month, the Empress must remember her origins. Must remember humility. I would like to honor that tradition here, on this station. James understood. You want to come back and clean floors? If you would allow it. Her eyes were hopeful. I find I rather enjoyed the quiet of the night shift. And the company. 6 months later, James Carter was back in Sector 7, pushing his cleaning cart down the familiar corridors. The wheels still squeaked. The floors still needed cleaning. The night shift was still quiet and dark. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and Anne, Victoria, walked through in a simple maintenance uniform, her hood up, a shy smile on her face. Hello, James. Hey, Anne. Right on time. They worked together in comfortable silence, two people who'd accidentally saved the galaxy by sharing a protein bar. When break time came, James pulled out 2 nutrition packs and coffee. You know, he said, handing her one, you don't have to keep coming here. You're Empress. You've got actual responsibilities. This is my responsibility, Victoria said, taking the food. Remembering what matters. Remembering why we chose peace. She met his eyes. And spending time with my friend. They sat in the dim corridor, splitting cheap station food, an Empress and a janitor who'd proven that the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. The galaxy would remember the treaty, the speeches, the grand diplomatic triumph. Historians would write books about the day peace was finally achieved. But James would remember simpler things. The way Anne had looked at that first protein bar like it was treasure. The sound of her laughter in the darkness. The moment she'd said I am not leaving you when he lay bleeding on the floor. And he would remember that sometimes, the most important thing you could do was share what little you had with someone who needed it. Because that, more than any weapon or treaty or show of force, was what actually changed the world. Same time next month? Victoria asked. James smiled. Wouldn't miss it. They finished their break and got back to work, cleaning floors in the quiet darkness, choosing kindness when no one important was watching. Which, James thought, was exactly when it mattered most.